Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ripened Heart podcast. I'm here with Erin Stiner today, who I'm so excited to talk with. I had been thinking about a topic for a few weeks now that I really wanted to address, and I thought it would be fun to bring in a fellow homeopath to discuss it. And the topic that we're going to be talking about today is why diagnosis means something very different to us as homeopaths. Sometimes diagnoses can be a helpful label. They can fit you into a category. A lot of times, in conventional medicine, they dictate what kind of treatment plan that you're going to get. But in homeopathy, we don't care so much about the diagnosis as we care about how you specifically are presenting your symptoms. And we're going to dive into this a lot more. But first, I just wanted to introduce Aaron. So he is a professional homeopath practicing in the Virginia suburbs of Washington, D.C. He's been seeing patients for over a year as he's finishing up at the School of Homeopathy. And so he primarily uses Zoom to see patients all around the world. And he has a specific interest in working with children, teens, and adults who wish to be free of anxiety, depression, ADHD, and chronic physical complaints like asthma, arthritis, and allergies. So he's really covering a great cluster of symptoms that, are so common today, unfortunately. And so before he was a homeopath, he actually spent 15 years working in the nonprofit sector. He holds his master's in nonprofit studies from Arizona State University and still works on social justice related projects. So welcome, Aaron. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited and happy to be here.
Yeah, so I always love to start off with talking about your homeopathy origin story. I feel like it's always so interesting how people come across homeopathy. Tends to be a bit of an underground network of people. Homeopathy can be hard to come across these days. So how did you get interested in homeopathy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like many people, homeopathy found me. I
Mhm.
didn't find homeopathy. We have a son who at the time was 9 years old and was dealing with a variety of health-related issues, primarily some emotional disturbances, anxiety, and depression. And we had gone at the time the conventional medicine route, and our son was on, I think, 2 or 3 different anti-anxiety and depression medications. And um, it just didn't seem like they were really curative in any way. They were sort of taking my wife and I always said that those medications seem to take the edge off. They seem to sort of tamp down the symptoms, but it was always the idea that the dose was going to increase over time, just an expectation that there'd always be an increased dose over time, and that he would likely be on these medications for the rest of his life. And then there was the side effects too. There was weight gain and other side effects, and regular blood tests to make sure that the medications weren't affecting his liver and kidney. And I just had this like thought in the back of my head somewhere that there had to be something different out there, something that was curative and something that didn't come with all of the side effects. And I still remember to this day, I was in a coffee shop and I ran into a former coworker of mine in the nonprofit sector, and she was at the time raising funds for the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, and just ran into her, hadn't seen her in several months, and we got into a conversation, and she said, "You have to see this doctor at the college. He specializes in working with kids and he uses homeopathy, and you should just, go see him for a visit and see how it works." And so I started taking our son to see this doctor. He's a naturopath who had a specialty in homeopathy, and he started our son on a remedy. And the funny thing is, the first thing that we noticed was different was that our son's feet stopped stinking, which I'm sure if he heard me say that now, he would kill me. But that was like, we didn't even go in with the idea of like, let's cure his stinky feet. But it turns out, that was part of his overall symptom picture. And fast forward a couple years later, and we were able to take him off of all of those psychotropic medications. And this is now 9 years ago, and he's a thriving teenager. And he's a teenager, but he's a thriving teenager and doing great in high school. And I mentioned when we were talking earlier that our family was took a year off and traveled the world, and there's no way we could have done that if he was still on those medications and still struggling with the issues he was struggling with. And I really credit homeopathy. So then I started seeing a homeopath, and we started treating acutes at home with homeopathy, and the story just kind of rolls on from there. So it's been
Wow.
quite the journey, and I feel incredibly blessed to have homeopathy in our lives.
Yeah, it really is such a blessing. And I just want to echo back, like, that is not an easy thing to go through with your son, and to, have kind of had divine intervention in a way of this friend coming in and saying, hey, there might be another way to do this, and that you were open-minded enough to try it. That's such a beautiful thing, because, it's not in everybody's, sometimes when you're on a specific path with treatment, especially when it's your child and it's such a delicate thing, it can be really hard to take a risk like that. And so that's kind of part of the reason I do this podcast, is to open up the world of homeopathy to people, so it's not this foreign, complicated, subject, and something that can really be curative for people and for so many things. And I find that so interesting. Thank you for sharing about his feet, because it's just saying that this remedy is really working on the whole person. Maybe his body was trying to get out some sort of toxicity through his feet. It's a detox organ. And so if something is smelly, it's usually a sign that the body is trying to get something out, and it's backed up, and that impacts the whole body, the mental state, other physical things. And so it's just beautiful that it worked on him entirely and in the direction that the body needed most. So that's what's so amazing about homeopathy, is that it's going to work on the whole person, even if you didn't intend on it to. You came in for a very specific thing, and it's like, oh, I guess, that was also troubling him, and we didn't even think about it because it's pretty minor, and the whole body is now back in balance. And that's so beautiful. And it's really interesting. So your son's journey, I'm curious, was it something where he found the remedy right away, or did he have to go through layers with it, or what was that like for him?
Yeah, he was able to hit on a remedy pretty quickly with him. And um, the thing that I appreciated about the homeopath that we were seeing is there wasn't um, uh, the idea of taking our son off of the prescription conventional psychotropic medications was a process that we went through over time, but there wasn't ever like, well, you need to stop doing that and just do homeopathy. It was that you could use these two things concurrently, and that even with the action of the psychotropic, conventional medication, that the remedy, because it was addressing him at a deeper level, would still have a curative action, and
Mhm.
that we could over time take him off of these medications, but that it wasn't a requirement that you could use the two concurrently. And I think, when you talk about sort of the ability to accept a different modality, or experiment with a different modality, I think that was really important to us at the time. And it was amazing to see how the remedy was acting on him on a deeper level. And the other thing that I've always appreciated about homeopathy is that as I mentioned, with the, the anti-anxiety medications and antidepressants, there was this idea that like, well, he's sort of broken in this way and he's never really going to be fixed in this way. He'll probably need to be on these medications for the rest of his life. Versus the homeopathic approach is no, like homeopathy can have a curative effect on a deeper level. And in fact, it's kind of funny now being on the other end of it as a homeopath. I often think like I'm putting myself out of business because I don't want a person to be on a remedy for the rest of their lives.
Right.
Like maybe they'll need the support of a remedy if they go through like an acute illness or a crisis situation. But the idea is that at a certain point you'll be at such a level of health that you won't need the support of the remedy.
Right.
um, and um, and that it's really the remedy is just a signal to your life force. The remedy is just trying to send you in a direction of healing, and once you kind of have that direction, you don't need the remedy anymore.
Yeah, it kind of sparks it. It reminds your body of how to do it, because it's always interesting. I love that homeopathy can still reach through, like you said, even with prescription medications. I mean, a lot of the patients that I shadow, they're on a lot of medication. It's just very common because we're in a world that's increasingly sick, unfortunately, and out of balance. And it's incredible, somebody will be on 6, 7 medications, been in pain for 20 years, and the remedy still reaches through all of that. Whereas the world that I came from, in natural health before I basically just stuck with classical homeopathy, was that you had to detox all of these medications out, and there was a lot of suffering involved through that process, where you would have to go on a lot of supplements and detox protocols and sweat it out and do all these things that were not only really expensive but caused a lot of reactions in people, that they had to go through. It wasn't a gentle process at all. It was very difficult. And then with homeopathy, it's like, you don't have to rock the boat. You don't have to shock the system. The body knows how to heal itself. It just needs that initial spark, that reminder, that thing that's going to cover their symptom picture so that it can gently heal, without that excruciating process that's years and years. Because, I think that's a problem with kind of both sides of medicine right now, conventional and natural, is that there's kind of a lifelong client kind of thing where it's like, you got to detox the next thing or do this. And it's not to criticize it at all. It's just a different way of looking at it. And the people that I see in my own journey is that there's a subset of the population that has very sensitive system that does a lot better with the homeopathic approach. It's not so jarring on the body. And so I love that the remedies can reach through the layers and heal regardless of all the suppression that's taken place over a lifetime with other medications and treatments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and, on the topic, I was thinking too, when you were talking about the topic of diagnosis too, and not trying to criticize like the other systems of medicine, because I think each system of medicine has its place. And, just in the same way that our bodies get out of balance for whatever reason, it could be that in our society right now, we're out of balance in how we use the various systems of medicine.
Mhm.
Um, like there are remedies, for example, for broken bones, but if someone breaks a leg, I probably am still going to send them to the emergency room for conventional treatment. There is
Right.
a place for conventional treatment. And in the same way, like when thinking about the idea of diagnosis, there is, I think, a pro. We were talking a little bit about this before. There's a pro in a diagnosis. A diagnosis, let's say, of anxiety or fibromyalgia can make a person feel like suddenly they're part of a community. They're not
Mhm.
alone.
Mhm.
Like, oh, I know there's other people out there who have anxiety, and that makes me feel like I'm not alone. Or I know there's other people out there who, have ADHD or whatever the case may be. I think that the con is that it gets overused,
Mhm.
and that the patient becomes a sum of diagnoses.
Yes.
They become, oh, I have a diagnosis of anxiety, so I go see a psychiatrist who can prescribe my anti-anxiety medication, and then I'm also a diagnosis of, arthritis, so I go see a different
Yeah.
doctor, and I go see another doctor for my kidney issues that are probably caused by my other medications. But
Yeah. It's a
I,
cascading effect.
yeah, and it's a fragmenting effect. We're not looking at the person as a whole person, in the same way that I'd never thought like my son's stinky feet could be addressed by the same remedy that's addressing his anxiety. I would look at those as like two separate issues that aren't related at all. And that's what I love about homeopathy, is that when someone comes to see a homeopath, the homeopath is treating them as an individual, not a
Mhm.
diagnosis. They're treating them
Mhm.
as a person, and they're looking at all of their symptoms, their mental and emotional symptoms, their physical symptoms, how they relate to the world,
Mhm.
um, and working to restore them to whole health.
Yeah.
If I find a remedy for someone, and it maybe helps their digestive disturbance, but it doesn't do anything for their anger, then I haven't found the best remedy for that individual, for that person.
Absolutely. And I think the other con that's coming to mind that's kind of interwoven into the pro of community in a diagnosis is that for some diagnoses, some of the more minor ones, that is a comfort. But then if you get like certain labels that have like a scary connotation to them, it kind of like shuts down your hope of ever healing. And because, we have a certain prognosis that we've agreed upon in society for certain diseases like cancer or MS or Parkinson's or, these more serious diseases. And the truth is that your body can always heal. Does everybody heal 100%? No. But what I really admired in watching my mentor work with people is that he doesn't flinch when people come in with these serious ailments. He has the same level of hope and optimism that he has with somebody who's coming in for a headache that they get with, PMS, something that's not so serious. He keeps that level of hope for them. And the healing that takes place for people who, just have a glimpse of hope, a glimmer that life can be better, life can be more pain-free, that somebody's not turning them away or scaring the crap out of them because they have a certain set of symptoms. It's been really healing for me to witness too, because, I come from a family that's had serious ailments. I've had quite a healing journey myself where, you know, it scares you. You lose hope. And then when you find something like homeopathy, it's like, oh, they're not going to treat me any differently than somebody who has less serious ailments. And then you can kind of divorce yourself from that label. The label doesn't own you anymore because there's always hope and there's always a way to heal. There's always a way to move forward. And that's just something that I've always really, really appreciated about homeopathy in particular, and in other areas of natural medicine too, that, you know, this is just a signal from the body. This is just a cluster of symptoms that we've labeled out of convenience. Something I've been thinking about is how there are certain labels that have the same exact umbrella of symptoms, but one person diagnoses you with chronic fatigue syndrome, One person will diagnose you with Lyme's. Another person will say you have fibromyalgia. Another person will say you need to detox your heavy metals. And so you kind of like, I've seen people who spin in circles over this, and they try to find this one cause of their symptoms. It's like they go after the heavy metals, and they go after the parasites, and they go after this or that. And it's this like endless rabbit hole that they get themselves into that sometimes can bring the body more out of balance, because there was a reason for all of those layers of adaptation that the body went through. And so, when you go to a homeopath, it's like the labels are helpful in a sense sometimes, because it can kind of, bring certain remedy groups to mind, like, oh, lanthanides are really good for autoimmunity, or etc. And so you can kind of narrow down the remedies a little bit, because, in homeopathy, we have like 1,000+ remedies at this point. You've got to narrow it down somehow. But from there, it's like, we want to know, okay, so you say you have a headache, numbness in your hands, or whatever you're presenting with, that you got this label of MS. But how do you specifically experience it? Because if we get 50 people in a room that were diagnosed with MS, none of them are going to present in the same way. They may have a similar cluster of symptoms, but one person is going to experience it more in the summertime. Another person is going to experience it more with digestive issues, at the same time as their numbness or whatever it may be. And then the other thing is, everybody's going to have a different point of onset. There's going to be a different thing that tipped the bucket that made their body finally express that severity of symptoms. And so in homeopathy, we look at that. Was it after the death of a loved one? Were you scared about, your children leaving home and you not being needed anymore as a mom? And that's when it kind of set in. All of these things we consider, so that we're addressing why the body is actually expressing the symptom, not just telling the body to shut up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about a case of a 9-year-old boy that I've been working with, and I think it illustrates what you're talking about really well. And his mom brought him to me because he was experiencing anxiety, and also had a diagnosis of ADHD for some of those symptoms. And I'll talk a little bit about his symptoms and how he experiences those symptoms. But what I find interesting is that the medications for anxiety often cause concentration issues. The side effects of an ADHD medication or of an anxiety medication are often concentration issues, which is a symptom of ADHD. And the ADHD medications often cause, as a side effect, anxiety. So that's another thing that happens with the diagnosis and the fragmentation of an individual into their diagnosis, is that they then go see separate specialists who give them separate medications to treat that, separate fragmented part of them, that often have side effects that will actually make the symptoms of another part of them worse. And so you have these, two medications that are working at cross purposes, because we're not looking at that patient as an individual. So for this 9-year-old boy, his anxiety issues were things like, he would see figures at night, he would hear voices at night, he'd wake up screaming, trouble falling asleep, would want to go into his mom and dad's bed, and he would fear thunderstorms. He would fear that his house would flood. He'd also had these anxious thoughts about things falling from the sky, airplanes or tree limbs falling from the sky. and he was easily startled by loud noises. And for conventional medicine, all of those various symptoms get lumped into the diagnosis of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
For a homeopath, those are all individualizing symptoms that help us select the remedy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and same with it, his ADHD symptoms. He was easily distracted, but um, he would get overwhelmed when he would have a huge assignment in front of him, and he would start to worry that the other kids in the classroom were getting the assignment done, and that he wouldn't get it all done in time, and he would get in trouble. And then he would start to have trembling in his chest and legs, and he'd hear voices that he can't do it. I can't do it. I'm stupid. I can't do it. And the same thing he would, when he would get ready to go to gymnastics, he would have these same voices that would show up in his head about, I'm not good enough and I can't do it. And so he wouldn't want to leave the house to go to gymnastics. And so again, these distraction issues all get lumped into ADHD, right? But there's all these individualizing symptoms underneath that diagnosis that make him who he is, and that's the remedy that we're looking to find, is it matches with who he is. But what I found really interesting about his case is that I would ask him to describe the experience in his body when these various things would happen. And what I found is that there's a similar experience in his body where he would make this clenching motion with his hands, and his shoulders and his arms would turn in on themselves and clench really tight, and that he said it was like he was getting scrunched and squeezed. And he said it would make him want to twist his arms and his wrists back and forth, and that it would make his body ache, and he would get scared because he's clenched and achy and hurting, and wouldn't want to leave the house because he's so scared, or wouldn't want to work on the assignment. And what he really wanted was to get good grades and do a good job. And he would try breathing exercises, and he was on these medications, but they just didn't help, like this scrunching, squeezing sensation that he would have in his body. They didn't help that go away. And so, that's the kind of thing that makes him an individual. It's that, like you said very well earlier, it's his experience in the moment of anxiety or distraction. What is his experience in his body and in his emotions and in his mind? And that's what individualizes him, and that's what helps us in those 2,000 plus remedies
Mm-hmm.
to find the individual remedy. And the remedy that I found for him was the homeopathic remedy borax, which
Oh.
is a mineral remedy. And as you mentioned, it's one of probably 500 remedies that are indicated for anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of a different 500 that are recommended for tension and concentration issues. And so there's probably 250 of those remedies that overlap. And so it's like, how can I keep going deeper and deeper? And
Mm-hmm.
what's interesting is that patients needing borax, they often describe a desire to assume this fetal position during these
Mm-hmm.
anxious episodes, and they express fears of natural disasters. And there's in borax, there's these wonderful descriptions of this sensation of things coming down from above, and that related to his fears of things falling from the sky, or thunderstorms, or natural disasters. And they often feel overwhelmed by tasks which seem too big, and they respond by this clenching up into themselves and pulling into themselves. And it's this fear of life being too much to handle. And so they're self-critical, and they want to retreat into a safe place. whether it's, if it's an adult, they want to just retreat into their home or a safe place, or for him, he's a 9-year-old, he'd often want to go to be in his parents' bed. That was his safe place. So it's a wonderful match on that experience of life. So again, you start with this very wide diagnosis of ADHD and anxiety, and it does, like you said, it points you in a direction.
Mm-hmm.
But what's underneath the anxiety? What is his, and as a homeopath, I'm not so concerned. Like, I don't maybe know what's caused him to have this experience, but I know that this is his experience, and if I can find a remedy that matches his experience, then that's when we can see the transformation and the cure. And so for him, very quickly his night terrors ameliorated. Like, he falls to sleep very easily, doesn't see figures at night, doesn't hear voices at night, no phantoms coming out of the window, much less startled by loud noises, significant reduction in any expression of fears of things falling out of the sky. He's completing assignments on time. His teacher isn't reporting that he's having any issues. He's much less self-critical. And what you'll see often in homeopathy is a few months later, you'll at a follow-up or a couple follow-ups later, I'll say to like his mom, well, does he ever say like, I'm stupid or I can't do it? And she'll say, he hasn't. I even forgot that was a symptom, like, because it clears and it goes away and it's not part of their experience anymore. And much better daytime energy, less restless at night. So just all of these, from a single remedy. And for him, I started out at the 1M potency and increased to the 10M potency once a month for, he's been in treatment for, I think, about 8 to 10 months, and just really shown significant improvements. And Hahnemann, who was the founder of homeopathy, his perspective was that we don't have to know like what that core disturbance was, that if you extinguish the symptoms, you've extinguished the core disturbance. And, I just really think that for this young boy, that he really is going to be on a path of like much more freedom to live his life as he wants to live his life, because we've helped to significantly reduce these limitations, things that were holding him back from really enjoying life. So I think that's an example that sort of demonstrates this idea of like a diagnosis versus like an individual.
Yeah, wow, what a beautiful case, and just amazing his turnaround, and how it shows how the body is so intelligent and how it expresses symptoms. It's doing it for a reason in a very specific way. It's just calling for balance. And that is kind of what I do like about homeopathy, is that you don't necessarily have to go on this guessing game rabbit hole, like I was kind of talking about earlier. You can just trust what's on the surface and treat what's on the surface. And that's why, another thing I've been thinking about is there's a lot of natural interventions that tend to mask or cover up symptoms. Things like even like tea tree oil, or biocides, as we call them, things that kind of kill things or quiet things down. That, as uncomfortable as symptoms can be, it's actually a really, really good idea to let those things express, because that's our hint as to what you were saying, that the core disturbance is actually going away. So, if we're constantly taking things that mask or cover up the symptoms, it's going to be really, really hard to know when we've gotten to that core and we've uprooted that core disturbance, so that we're not going to express something else later down the line. Because the more that we push the symptoms into the body, the more they'll kind of rear their ugly heads in ways that are going to get our attention and be more painful potentially. And so I think that that's something that I really wanted to drive home as well today in this podcast, is to just be mindful. It's not a judgment at all. It's just being mindful of the little things that we do on a daily basis that are suppressing and covering up discomfort. How can we move through that, and how can we address the root cause with something like homeopathy so that we don't have to do that? The body is trying to express something to you for a reason. And so, and it's kind of just based on our culture, right? It's like, I know growing up, when I was in the more conventional side of things, you just reach for the coffee, or you just reach for the Tylenol, or you just automatically knee jerk to cover up your symptoms, Claritin in allergy season. It's just a way of life in our culture with the introduction of pharmaceutical drugs. And while they serve a place, it's like, I think we just really need to shift our perspective on symptoms and why our body is expressing them. It's not just to be annoying or to give us a hard time. It's trying to tell us something early on so that they don't snowball into something down the road that's more serious. Do you have any thoughts on that, Aaron?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very well said. And what's amazing about homeopathy and is that clearing happens in such a gentle way. When I first started studying homeopathy and began thinking of symptoms in a different paradigm as a signal of a disturbance rather than something that needs to be controlled or suppressed, and learning about how a homeopathic remedy helps our body to clear these symptoms, I thought that meant that, let's say I had anger issues. I thought that it meant that meant, I had to take a remedy that would make me really, really angry so that I would clear those symptoms. But it doesn't work that way. It's much more gentle in that it's the body's our system sort of gets stuck in with a certain symptom picture. And with homeopathy, it's just a little gentle nudge or a signal for your system to move in a different direction, and that you find over time in your experience of taking a remedy that those symptoms that you were once stuck with, like those anger symptoms that you were once stuck with, they just ease and they relax over time. And it's not as if they have to like fully explode or blow up in order to clear, versus the opposite of conventional medication, which is just trying to put a lid on that anger. And so actually what happens is that over time it does build up and and you do explode. There's also in homeopathy, I'm reminded of something I encountered early on, is that many homeopaths would often see that a child who maybe has eczema, at a young age, and receives some sort of like suppressive medication, like a cream over the eczema, that then the eczema goes away, but then they start having like severe like throat infections or ear infections, and so then they go to the doctor and they start receiving medications, antibiotics that will suppress the ear infections and the throat infections, and those go away. And then the few years later, the child is having anxiety issues or anger issues because you keep sort of pushing the symptoms deeper into the system. And so maybe when the child receives homeopathic treatment, there might be like a small reoccurrence of that throat infection, or the eczema might have to reappear for, but it would just be like for like a day or two. It's not as if it's going to be
Yeah.
like some raging attack. It's just like now there's something different happening in the system that's helping the body to subtly let go of these things that it's been holding on to.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of read my mind because I was going to ask you about retracing, because I came across this really interesting case. Somebody essentially was using a nasal spray, for chronic sinusitis, and they would use it when they had like an acute flare up. And when they had a well-matched remedy for them, basically it was as if the body remembered every time that she had suppressed it. So it was like, let's say like 5 times she suppressed these sinusitis symptoms when they were acute or really, really, knocking on her door. The remedy retraced it 5 times. Just a little bit, like you said, it wasn't like a raging, sinus infection, but it was like she had to go through the 5 layers that she had suppressed. And I find that so interesting that there's evidence now that the body really remembers all of that. And, it's trying to adapt to that and keep you alive the best that it can. So, like you said, it gets in this stuck state where, it's like, all right, well, we don't know how to figure this out anymore. We're just going to, move you over from an acute sinus infection to a low grade chronic sinus issue. And so then you get a remedy and it's like, oh, okay, we have enough life force now to really get through this stuck energy and move it. And it's like the temptation is, even with homeopathic care, is like, let me go to the sinus spray. I don't want to feel the symptom. It's like, no, just get through that couple of days, because on the other side of that is like never having to use that spray again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great example. And yeah, I think that what I have often seen with patients as well is that because, as you mentioned, there is a reliance on medication and pharmaceutical medication in our country. That's sort of just like the default of where people go in terms of trying to get through whatever illness or disorder they have. Is that how well homeopathy can work, and I mentioned this earlier, how well homeopathy can work in conjunction with those medications as you are like slowly tapering off. Because I think that if you had a patient that was on, and several of the patients I work with are on several medications, so most of them aren't just usually on one medication, that each of those medications requires their own tapering process,
Oh, definitely.
and that it could be a shock to the system, that if you started on the homeopathic treatment and then just dropped all of the
Oh, yeah.
other medications. And
Yeah.
so what we see is that over time people are able to slowly reduce the other medications that they're on, um, and maybe in a way that is a bridge to them as they move towards this place of more natural treatment through
Mhm.
homeopathy. Maybe it helps support them slowly and gently towards a place of more whole health. And then you often find at the end of it that the patient isn't on any of these medications that
Right.
they were on before, and they're in such a great state of health. And they but I think there's probably areas of the country where homeopathy and natural medicine and areas of the world are just such part of the culture that people turn there first, right? And
Mhm.
or when they're ready to turn to homeopathy, there's like an implicit trust of homeopathic medications. And then there's other parts of the country where homeopathy is like a big experiment, and it's something
Yeah.
that they're like, maybe a friend or family member has told someone about homeopathy and they're trying it for the first time. I'm thinking of a patient that I worked with who she was a COVID long hauler, and she was on migraine medication, and she was on like two or three other medications as well for separate issues. And and homeopathy was like a big experiment for her, and if I would have said, well, our goal is to get you off all of these other
Oh, yeah.
medications, she would have said, no way, like, I'm not even, if that's our goal, then forget about it,
Oh, yeah.
and
Absolutely.
um, and so I think that's a gift that homeopathy gives us in a way, is
Mhm.
that you can say to someone, like, you can stay on your other medications, and you and I know that it's the remedy is acting on this like deeper level, and it is bringing about like transformational curative change. And that's when you get the real fans of homeopathy, is when like a few years later they're like, oh, I'm not even on a homeopathic remedy anymore, I'm like, it's just me and my body and my life force like standing on its own you know
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. And the case with the sinus problem, it's more of like what I see too is that there's a lot of people who are familiar with natural medicine. They're not even on pharmaceuticals and things like that, but they're used to like the crutch of like the essential oil nasal spray that masks the symptom, or the clove oil for their toothache, things like that that are natural, but they're masking the symptom and they're kind of pushing the infection to try to adapt to this essential oil that's killing off the bacteria. Things like that has been interesting too, to be like, maybe don't always reach for that, and let the body express, because it's trying to heal with your remedy. I don't know if you've seen that in practice too, where it's like, the people that are coming in that there are very gung-ho on the natural, but they're still kind of trying to mask the symptom and things like that. And of course homeopathy works along with that, but sometimes it can be kind of um, something that can get in the way of the remedy acting, especially things like tea tree oil, which can antidote and interfere with the remedy, the essential oils, things like that, that people kind of see as benign, but it can actually disturb the body further in a way. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of that some of the natural things can still act as kind of a disturbance in the healing process. It's something that I had to learn for sure, because I was very, I had my oil kit, and I just would automatically, without thinking about it, when I had something wrong with like a tooth, to just swish with this oil, or to just mask whatever with a lot of ginger for my stomach ache, or something like that, where it's like, it's amazing as like an ally and a helper, but it's there's a misconception that these natural treatments are getting to the root of it. Do you know what I mean? There's like a misconception that those kind of natural alternatives are actually fixing the issue, and they're kind of just masking it in a similar way to a pharmaceutical, just with less side effects.
yeah yeah and it's interesting because having that the essential oil one is a good conversation to have, like, with the patient. And there are some patients, I'm thinking of like two patients that I have, one who, like, for her to give up her essential oils, I think she would have stopped coming to me as a homeopath, and the other was like, oh yeah, sure, I see that, that makes sense. And so I do think, it's a healing journey for
Totally.
people, and I think with one of the things that my supervisor really has stressed with me, I can think of like another patient where I thought, man, if this patient like stopped this particular treatment, she would be so better off. And
Mhm.
My supervisor really helped me to understand like that we're trying, you have to meet people where they're at and walk them through this process,
Absolutely.
and that and that then it becomes like a discussion of what are their goals, what
Right.
are their goals for healing long term, what are their goals for how they want to approach life and approach their healing journey. And I think with each patient you're meeting them at like a different place in that journey.
Totally.
Yeah, and trying to help understand like how can I best support this person in becoming whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just something where I've encountered people just they have no idea and they don't know. And it's cool when, automatically a lot of times with the support of the remedy, they just find themselves reaching for it less too. And it
absolutely.
like a natural thing. And that's something that I really love about the use of remedies is, I also use muscle testing and things like that in my practice because I'm always trying to tap into what their body actually wants. Because the other thing that I think is important is that there are never any blanket statements on what's good for everybody and what's not good for everybody. And so I love when the body can just tell us what it wants, what it needs, what potency does it need, how often, what foods are working for you right now, what foods aren't. Do you need that essential oil or do you not? And it's cool when people can learn how to do something like muscle testing where they can just ask their body what it wants and needs and can get really in tune with themselves. And I think that that's what the homeopathic intake process does too, is it makes people a lot more self-aware of what they're going through, and they start to really think about it and they start to be more in tune with themselves. And I think that that's such a beautiful thing to watch and witness in people, and a gift to give people, the gift of feeling empowered and self-aware in themselves, and that they're really in the driver's seat in this healing journey. And it's going to have ups and downs and twists and turns, and it's going to be a really beautiful process that they get to go through.
Yeah, when it brings to mind, I think you and I both share an interest in the spiritual aspects of homeopathy and how homeopathy links to one's spiritual journey. And the many of the spiritual traditions focus on self-examination, and they
Mhm.
focus on these questions of who am I, and why am I here, and what is my place in the world, and how do I understand the world around me. And I absolutely, like you were just saying, that's the one of the great gifts of the homeopathic intake, is that it is an exploration of who you are as a person. It is, in the same way with this 9-year-old boy, like who I was working with, who it is, yes, his symptom of attention and concentration. And then there's also this like beautiful expression of like, I want to be a good student, I really desire to be a good student, and so it's these conversations about your values and what's important to you. And that's what helps make a good remedy match.
Mhm.
And then that's also like this whole side benefit of homeopathy, of self-discovery and self-examination. And I think that process is a baseline for these sort of, let's call them like spiritual questions of what is my place in the world. And I think for me, I know it's been significantly helpful in my own self-examination of my life. Um, and the other side of it is that if you sort of look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you've got a constant ache in your right knee,
Mhm.
or you have like constant like disturbances in your gut. It's a lot harder to like take time and energy and think about a more spiritual question. Like
Mhm.
you're less worried about your place in the world. Your knee hurts all of the time. And when we can free people from pain and free people from emotional disturbances, it frees up energy for them to explore these questions and to expand their awareness that they might not otherwise be able to spend time on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see a polarity a lot where the pain shuts down that process, or the pain can make one obsessive about the process. Because I don't know if you've seen that too, where if somebody has an illness, they can become almost like way too introspective and obsessive about their spiritual journey and getting it right and evolving in an attempt to be free of the pain as well, of like a preoccupation with getting this life right and perfect, and digging to the deepest depths of emotions and past trauma to try to free themselves of the pain that can also be a loop that they get stuck in. It's interesting that both sides can express, as things always tend to do, even with remedies. They're either, very neat or very messy within the same remedy, same polarity, and it's like they're as I've been on my own journey, I've found that when I'm more in balance, my perspective on that is more balanced. It's like there's a level of introspection, and I love meditation and understanding my past, but it doesn't become like my life, if that makes sense. And it's interesting how even the good things like spirituality can be out of balance in people. I'm thinking about remedies like helium or hydrogen that are so into meditation, so up in space, because the body is a painful place to be, that their body's way of adapting is to kind of dissociate in meditation, things like that. Um, that's kind of what we call like the hydrogen or the helium state, which the remedy will actually help ground them and bring them back into the body. And it's just a beautiful thing that we all express our illness so differently, and where we're out of balance for one person is total opposite. But in the end, homeopathy really does bring you back to yourself and what balance is for you and what you need. And yeah, I'm curious if you're willing to share some of your spiritual journey and how homeopathy has kind of helped shape it for you. I'd love to get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's probably more on the for me it's been the idea of trying to let go of some of the more painful experiences
Mm-hmm.
that have maybe kept me in like more like less connected to the spiritual side of myself, so more
Yeah,
being more like tied down by physical and emotional pain, that then maybe
yeah,
because I'm tied down by that, I'm less able to connect with maybe the some of the more spaciousness that one can find in sort of a meditative sitting or in a spiritual awareness. So that's been the end of my journey. And then I also think like about the piece about just seeing myself, that I think
mm,
that as I'm examining myself for like a symptom, I'm starting to gain some objectivity about
yeah,
like what I'm going through. And it allows me to maybe be less identified with a particular a particular ailment within myself or a particular way of looking at things. I also think like a big thing for me, now having seen patients and working with people is adapting and understanding like a more universal mindset of, there's not anyone in the world who's got it all figured out, and we're
Yeah.
all like suffering from some level of illness or ailment. And,
Mhm.
that, uh, we sort of have this common human experience of really all trying. I really think, and this actually, this is a little less on homeopathy, but when we traveled the world for a year, I think one of the things that our whole family saw is that like people are people across like the whole globe, and it's so cliche to say, I know, but I think we ran into we were gone literally 365 days. And I think we ran into like one bad dude the whole 365 days. One person who I thought was really like just, not very nice in an extreme way,
Mhm.
and and what you see is that people all kind of have like the same, desires and needs and goals, and that most people out there are trying to do a good job in life, and they're trying to be kind,
Mhm.
that maybe they get derailed in those pursuits. And so I think, combine that with then seeing patients and talking with people about what ails them. um so in that way, from the spiritual side of it, it helps me to connect with, humanity a little bit more. It helps me to
Totally.
be more empathetic and more compassionate, and it wants it, like I have a patient that I'm working with right now, and he's like, in his mid 40s, and he's a dad. And his one of his struggles is that like he has so much pain that like when his kids like crawl all over him, like he gets really irritable and doesn't, and kind of pushes them off. But that's not what he wants. Like
Right.
what he wants is to like be there for his kids and have fun and rumble and tumble around, but he can't do that because he's limited by his pain. And so it it creates in me this desire to like help and to relieve some of the suffering of humanity. And for me, that feels like something that's connected to like a higher purpose.
I completely agree. And I think through hearing so many people's stories, it makes you realize we really are not alone at all. And even some of our deepest traumas and things we've experienced that we feel alone in, or that, don't feel common, or we feel like people can't relate to that, or they haven't gone through that. It's like the things that people don't share with others that they have gone through. It's crazy because there is a lot of commonality in trauma too that people experience that really kind of blew me away as I was hearing patients talk about their lives, is that a lot of us have been through a lot of stuff. And if we could just be more open with each other in real life, out of the clinical setting, and be more vulnerable and connect in that way, that a lot of healing could come through that, just in personal relationships too, our friends, and our family. And I think that that's something that homeopathy really taught me too, is that there's no reason to feel like othered, or and that a lot of people feel othered.
Yeah,
And it's a common experience, and one that we could connect on if we kind of, like, I wish everybody could see humanity as we do, because we see the commonalities and we see the shared experiences that we could be connecting on.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well
Well, I think
said.
that's a good place to end it, Erin.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on. Please share where people can find you.
Yeah, so my website is www.risingsun-wellness.com, and I can be reached at email is ASTINER at risingsun-wellness.com. And I'm happy to give out my telephone number. It's 602-349-7603. So call me or text me, and I'd be happy to talk, just jam about homeopathy or help people through their acute illness or their, chronic illness or whatever people need support in. I'm happy to engage and help.
Beautiful. Well, I'll put that in the show notes as well. And thank you again for being on.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you.